somebody had to open the event, and I guess that was going to be me. So what I'm going to take you through today is really what's changed in workplace wellbeing in the last year or so. Obviously, a lot has happened. I'll be talking about what's next, what's coming, what the trends are, and also what the research has found to be the most effective wellbeing initiatives. So it's going to be a really good overview of wellbeing right now. And I'm also going to share some of our own research, and I'll introduce myself properly in a second. I will say that today may be a bit of pandemic or COVID bingo. I'm sure that the words are going to come up a lot. So feel free to play bingo on that if you like. So just for a bit of background, I'm one of the co-founders of Fiddle Leaf. We are a workplace wellbeing platform. We're backed by Nobel Prize nominated science, and I will be sharing a few of our findings a little bit later on. We run a free wellbeing workshop every single month, and as it was World Wellbeing Week, we decided to do something just a little bit bigger. And then obviously we had 300 people register for this event, so it got quite big. But let's dive in and start by looking at what we used to think of as workplace wellbeing. So if you take a look at this list, I'm sure that you will all be familiar with these things, definitely pre-COVID. So on the right-hand side, we have a Google office. This was something that became a big trend in the early 2000s, about having these sort of really funky offices, and they were almost classed as well-being tools, I guess, for people. And recent research has found that some of these things that you can see in this list here were ranked the highest in terms of the percentage of employers expecting to spend less in them this year. So I'll give you some examples, things that we associate, such as free, healthy food, snacks, stocked kitchens. 54% of employers will invest less in these this year. Maybe there's an answer in that, the fact that a lot of people are working from home, but on-site fitness classes, 48% of employers are going to be spending less this year. Gym membership reimbursement, 38% less. So obviously COVID is a factor, but I wonder if some employers have realized that perhaps these things don't necessarily impact on well-being. They're perks, but are they well-being? And I really invite any comments in the chat box throughout this. I know I'm going to throw out a few questions as well in a little while. So that's what employers are going to spend less of their wellbeing budget on. But what do staff actually want? Well, I'm sure you could have guessed what staff have been struggling with, but I wonder how many of you that are here now agree with this, or may agree with this too. So I find it quite interesting looking at this, what employees were saying that they want. And do we sometimes overcomplicate what employees want? They were saying that they want clarity, community, purpose, the things that they're feeling. And you can tell this research was actually done at the height of COVID. So you can really understand why things like burnout, Zoom overload, and we're going to do our best not to have you feeling overloaded today, lack of support, all those things, you can see why they were at the forefront of people's mind, or why they were struggling with them at the time. And what they were asking for: clarity, community, purpose. How many of you listening now are considering these three things when you're thinking about workplace wellbeing? You can see how they really fit, as I said, with early pandemic sort of feelings. There was a lot of uncertainty, I guess, if you think back to this time last year. But you can see why people were asking for things like, am I going to lose my job? There's no clarity. I'm feeling isolated. I'm not feeling that community. So I think regardless of what the industry is, regardless of what the job is, whether it's office-based or not, one thing that the pandemic has done is this. The pandemic has brought out the personal aspect of the workplace. It's really brought personal into work. So you may have heard stories about staff who have had to care for loved ones that you didn't know about prior to the pandemic, or people who support others or have other commitments. We've seen the inside of people's kitchens, their home offices, and even their bedrooms. Early on in the pandemic, I took a meeting with somebody who was literally sat on the edge of their bed whilst they had the meeting with me. And What staff want in terms of wellbeing support has probably never been more important as it is right now. And today we are going to cover some of these things, the things that might not have been part of your wellbeing plan before, things such as financial wellbeing, for example. We're going to try and cover the things other than perks, such as yoga. And if any of you know me here, you know that I give yoga a bit of a hard rap. But the things that are going to make a difference to people personally, and not just at work. And I think this is the real theme to come out of the last year, I think. Would love to hear your thoughts on that. The chat is very quiet. So let me share with you the trends which are coming out now and kind of moving into 2021. So we have the mental health services, services such as Sanctus, if anyone is familiar with Sanctus, who provide in-person counselling. And then we also have a fairly new company called Spill, who provide mental health services through Slack, which is definitely growing in popularity. Things such as more personalized wellness services for staff. So subscription services such as Juno, if anybody is familiar with Juno, they give employees a budget or points, a bit like your kind of Boots Advantage card. And you can actually each employee can pick what works for them based on this subscription service. We've then got expanding the traditional ideas of well-being and focusing on key dates, things such as Pride, Black History Month, other aspects of well-being such as finances. So we've got people looking, I guess, a little bit more outside of the box than they were a few years ago at things which actually do impact on well-being in the workplace. And then we have things such as training in resilience, training in stress management. 81% of companies are planning to invest in more of this in 2021. This is research from Wellbeing, but I think 81% of companies investing in stress management. That's a big number, and I'd love to hear if anybody is looking at anything like this, or if you're now kind of scribbling that down and thinking, yep, actually this is something that we do really need to focus on. And I think on top of this list, I really do have to talk about hybrid working. I can't miss that out. Research from PwC has found that 55% of employees say that they would ideally like to work from home 3 days a week. Now, the same question that went to senior execs, they said that they felt 3 days a week in the office was crucial for company culture and productivity. So we've got a slight disparity there, but it does seem to be sort of 2 to 3 days a week in the office, at home, seems to be what people want, what people are asking for. So I wonder if you're moving towards that. And later on today, Dawn is going to be talking about hybrid working. So I think that's definitely a session that will be worthwhile tuning in for. What I will say that research brought out is that actually less experienced workers seemed to benefit from the office structure more. And I wonder how that then creates a divide between sort of more senior workers and less experienced workers. So how can you factor hybrid working into your wellbeing plan? I know from our tech rehearsals yesterday, this is something that's going to come up later. So I'd be curious to know if people are already implementing this or not. But anything there that you haven't already thought of, anything there that makes you think, actually, maybe this is something we should look into. I'd love to know. And this is where we tend to struggle. This is kind of what we're up against. If you handle the budget, or you need to get budget approval for any wellbeing initiatives that you're running, this may be something that gets in the way. So I wanted to share these stats with you because I feel like there needs to be a bit of an acceptance, actually, that retention rates for a lot of wellbeing initiatives are relatively low. This is coming from somebody who runs a workplace wellbeing app as well. So, I'm being a bit brave sharing these stats, but retention rates are fairly low. And I think that this is why anybody looking at a wellbeing plan for this year, next year, needs to be thinking about a multifaceted approach. Now, I've put gym membership up up there, because I think gym membership is something that we can all relate to, we understand. And I wanted to include what the gym membership retention rate is. So it's 33%. I don't know about you, but I actually thought that that would be higher. I guess culture today, societal changes, social media, obviously the gym culture has grown, but gym retention is still 33%. Um, Popular meditation apps, things that you may be using with your company, the big ones, the big names, their retention rate is just 6%, which is, again, surprisingly low. But I do think that just like gym culture and gym memberships, the entire gym culture is growing, is continuing to grow, and likely will grow further, just because of the society that we live in, the way things are these days. I think that these apps will grow as well. I do think that, your meditation apps, your kind of personal development apps, I do think that retention will gradually increase. Counselling, I was surprised the low retention rate for counselling. I thought that a one-to-one service would have a higher retention rate. I'm actually going to come to that a little bit later. So as I said, I think that as memberships, as the culture sort of grows around things like meditation, etc., I think that the retention rates will also grow. An interesting one, I did a bit of research, 14% of Brits meditate right now. I speak to a lot of people that say they meditate, but apparently only 14% of Brits meditate. And I wonder, if you think about your employees and your staff, is catering for 14% of your company worth it? It probably is. It possibly is. You may need to weigh up costs and things like that. But even though these retention rates are still relatively low, it is probably still worth catering for that percentage of people. So are employees trying to race for a quick solution to new ways of working when it might be better to take our time? I think that's really interesting. Over 1 to 2 years rather than 1 to 2 months. Yeah, I definitely think the knee-jerk reaction doesn't always deliver what employees want anyway. And a lot of people don't take the time to talk to their staff. They might send out a survey and that might be quite led in a certain direction. So let's have a look at something else that you may be up against. This is the big one. Who's having a little cringe as they read this? And who's maybe heard something like this from the top? Is this statement that job stress is a more effective driver of productivity than wellbeing programs? Is that something that you have heard or similar in your recent months? Is this something that you are fighting against in order to get investment for well-being in your company? Now, I hate to say this, but to a certain extent, the person who said this is right in a way. If you are familiar with Freud's pain and pleasure principle, it's worth pointing out that job stress, or that pain of the pressure, will always get something out of someone in the short term. In the short term, pain is more effective than pleasure in getting results. And obviously pleasure is well-being in this case, in this example. So I'm really sorry to say that, but long term, it's not sustainable. An attitude like this will lead to burnout of employees. It will lead to staff turnover. Yes, it may work in the short term. It may work to deliver results in a very short space of time, but long term, absolutely not. Okay, so people are saying that they've heard this as well. So that's interesting. I'm going to come back at this from a slightly different angle when I share some of our own research shortly. But I am curious, are you dealing with attitudes like this from your management, from your boards? Are you struggling to push through any new ideas because they're being sort of batted away with attitudes like this? I was quite surprised when I read this and I thought, oh, this is something that people are likely up against. So if we know that retention rates for wellbeing initiatives is relatively low. Execs believe that stress and pressure is more effective anyway. Then how do you go about designing, pitching, running a successful wellbeing plan for your company? So I'm going to focus for just a few minutes on some research that was done by Deloitte in January 2020. It was called Refreshing the Case for Investment into Mental Health and Wellbeing. I would say that really unfortunately, because this was published in January 20, lots of it is now outdated. But when I looked through it, there were two key areas that might be even more relevant today. So firstly, there was a big section on financial well-being and education and the impact that that has in the workplace. Tara is going to be talking about this later on this afternoon. So if you can make that session, I think that's going to be really, really interesting. It also talked about the rise of leavism. Leavism, they described this as working outside normal hours, being unable to switch off due to things such as technology, and that leading to mental exhaustion and burnout. And I think that we have probably all experienced elements of that in the last year, potentially even more so than when we were in normal times, let's say. And Katie will be doing a couple of sessions on burnout later, one aimed at everyone, like, aimed at you, aimed at employees, and one aimed at more HR management as well. So I think leavism is a really important topic today. And what are you doing to address that happening in your company? But looking at the investment and return of investment, that was really interesting when this research went into that. And the research is slightly more aimed at mental health support rather than overall well-being, but I do think it's still really useful, and I want to share some of this with you. So what they did was they looked at the type of wellbeing initiatives that were the most effective and what delivered the highest return on investment. So if you are, as I said, battling against management for investment, then this might make some really good backup for you. So return on workplace interventions, workplace wellbeing is largely positive, but it does vary on a number of factors. So what stage the intervention is introduced. So obviously early intervention is always better than reactive. The type, which I'm going to talk about in a second. So things, from therapy to training, culture change, and then the size of the group. And company-wide initiatives were always more effective. And the average return of investment was £5 for every £1 spent. So pretty good ROI actually for wellbeing initiatives. And so the sort of examples they had was reactive, such as counselling. So when somebody flags that they need extra support, one-to-one counselling delivered a ROI of 3 to 1. I was actually, and I mentioned this earlier, I was actually surprised how low that was. I did think that one-to-one would have a much higher return on investment, but perhaps it's because it's not rippled through the rest of the team or the company. Proactive workshops, just as we were saying earlier, stress management, that type of thing, resilience workshops, and group coaching had actually a higher return, £5 for every £1 spent. And going more company-wide, adding more tailored elements, adding online elements, moved it up to £6 for every £1 spent. Now, the most successful return on investments, which was about £10 for every £1 spent, they actually included a little bit of everything. So a really broad program that included things such as screening individuals for targeted early intervention, tailored support online, stress management, workshops, something that kind of included aspects of everything. And I think that this is just the absolute proof that wellbeing cannot be a one-off. You can't run something on World Wellbeing Week and that be you done for the year. It needs to be sewn through the organisation. If anybody is thinking, well, all of this sounds actually quite expensive, I don't think we're going to have the budget for this. This research actually found that awareness and culture change had really high returns, almost as high as some of the other things that I've mentioned, and can actually be really cost effective. Now, we have produced a wellbeing calendar for the rest of the year that just shows key dates that you can pick up on as part of your wellbeing plan and suggest some different ideas of things. Some of them are more fun, some of them are a little bit serious, depending on what the awareness day is. But we will get that out to you in the digital goodie bag, and that can be a really simple way of starting to include some wellbeing things across the year. So I would like to share our own research now, but I'm going to see if there's any of the comments. So yeah, I expected a bit of a mixed comments about this kind of fully remote versus back in the office and where we kind of sit with that. And I think it is a tricky one. And somebody who says that most of the team want to get back to the office and see each other face to face. I do agree that there's an element of that. We're social creatures. People, how do you kind of balance it really and get the best for everyone? And I think as well, somebody who was talking about setting a plan in stone right now, if you have everybody come back to the office full time immediately, people are going to be exhausted. It's if anybody else has even had a day out in the last year and felt that kind of real tiredness when you get home because we're just not used to it, any of these things need to be phased. But let me move on. I'd like to share some of our own research. So just for a bit of background, we're a wellbeing platform. We're backed by Nobel Prize nominated science, and we use an assessment actually to measure 10 wellbeing areas in our users. It's not a survey. It can't be led by the participant. It's very abstract, and I won't go into any more than that. I'm not here to do a sales pitch, but just to explain a little bit of the background. And I'd like to share some of our data. So we've actually collated data from pre-2020, and we've compared that with the data of our users over the last year. And this is really interesting. We were looking at this about a month ago, and it was surprising actually. So when we looked at work stress, this is how people cope, how they maintain a positive attitude, etc., around work stress. Their ability to cope, we can actually only see a 1% difference from pre-pandemic to current now. The reason why we've laid it out like this is because we use a scale like this to display results to our users. We obviously don't do a comparison like this, but that's why I've laid it out this way. But what's interesting about this, and did anybody expect to see this, is that it's telling us that our users are coping just as well with the work stress as they were pre-pandemic. They're able to handle the work, they're able to handle the pressure. And this is, it's quite interesting. Somebody's asking how many users. It's about 250 of our today. The pre-pandemic data was a lot more than that. But this is, the interesting thing about this is it is very similar stats when we look at things like burnout potential, which is another area that we measure. I think there was only 1 to 2% difference. I know Katie might agree with me when we talk about burnout later, but I'll put it in context because this all changes when we start to look from this work stress, which is what we call an external pressure, to when we move on to internal pressure. Now I'm going to start at the top. We've seen personal stress levels go up by 27% in the last year. Now, what this data is suggesting is that people are still able to handle work stress and pressure of the job, but where they're holding that stress, where they're holding that pressure is internally. I'll reference an anecdote. Somebody was talking to me about this and why they thought that could be. And they said, even though my work is saying to take breaks and my work is saying not to work in the evening and go for walks, etc., I'm putting more pressure on myself. Fear of losing my job, fear of being seen to not be working hard enough, that pressure for perfectionism, all of these things, it's dramatically affecting self-criticism and self-esteem in employees. So what our research is showing is that these are the real issues that need to be addressed. And I would say, looking at these numbers, these areas should be a priority in any wellbeing plan. How can you actively support personal wellbeing? How can you reduce self-criticism in your people, potentially through culture change or through your wellbeing initiatives? And how can you build self-confidence? this data, it was quite startling to me. I don't know how everybody's feeling looking at these percentages. I've seen our data go up and down over the years. I've been working with this science for a long time, but I've never seen it dramatically as different as it has gone in the last year. Please focus your interventions and your initiatives here. And if execs are saying to you that they don't have the budget, ask them what a self-esteem drop of 34% in your people is doing to average sales figures, productivity, creativity, innovation. That's the question that I would be asking to management, and because this will be having an effect. So I'm going to wrap up. We are going to move on to the next speaker, but just to kind of share these key takeaways to kick off today. Broad initiatives that run company-wide with some tailored aspects will always deliver the best return on investment. Hybrid working has got to be addressed. Deloitte has been making waves in the last week. If anybody's seen the news, they've announced that everybody can work from home. Take a look at what your competitors are doing, because if staff are wanting 3 days at home, how can you make that office time productive? Build the community element into it. And ongoing initiatives, like I say, we have a wellbeing calendar that we're going to get out to you later on today. Keep that, stay inspired to raise awareness through these different days and build wellbeing into your culture. We will also share our epic guide to workplace wellbeing with you towards the end. So I've got probably a minute for any questions that have kind of popped up in the chat. And then I will do my sort of into the next slides. But please feel free to get in touch with me, and obviously we'll send out some information after.
There are a couple of questions that I've picked up that have just gone past in the scroll of the chat. They're back up somewhere. A question from Taj asking about, do you have any breakdowns of the demographics for the app usage, with like the retention rates?
Oh, right.
Any of those broken down, like
if younger people are more likely to use, I didn't get that far, to be honest, in my research, but that would be quite interesting to find out, because I wonder if you have a younger workforce, are they more likely to use those meditation apps, etc., or not? I don't know. That would be interesting to look into, actually.
And there was a question about, do you have any suggestions for interventions for self-criticism and self-esteem?
Yeah, I would say however you'd like to do it, you can look at, obviously, without plugging us too much, we do run workshops on these types of things, but you can find people who are running confidence workshops. If I could give a shout out to somebody else actually who's called Confident and Killing It, a girl called Tiwa, runs great workshops on building confidence, particularly for young people. But yeah, get on Google, search, post on LinkedIn, ask people. But where they were saying that those workshops were having quite a good return on investment, I would say if you want to target confidence, you want to target self-esteem and self-criticism, that's probably a good way to go. Thanks, Adam. Right, I am going to try to